Gregor MacGregor was born on Christmas Eve 1786 at his family's ancestral home of Glengyle on the north shore of Loch Katrine in Stirlingshire, Scotland. He would later ironically claim in adulthood that a direct ancestor of his had survived the Darien scheme of 1698, the ill-fated Scottish attempt to colonize the Isthmus of Panama. In April of 1803, he joined the British Army at 16, the youngest age it was possible for him to do so. His entrance to the military coincided with the start of the Napoleonic Wars following the breakdown of the Treaty of Amiens. Southern England was fortified to defend against a possible French invasion. His regiment, the 57th Foot, was stationed at Ashford, Kent, in February 1804, after less than a year in training. MacGregor was promoted without purchase to lieutenant, an advancement that usually took up to 3 years. He was introduced to the wealthy heiress Maria Bowwater, the daughter of a Royal Navy admiral, in around 1804. They married at St. Margaret's Church, Westminster in June 1805 and set up home in London at the residence of the bride's aunt. 2 months later, having rejoined the 57th Foot in Gibraltar, MacGregor bought the rank of captain for about £900 or about £97,000 in today's money, as of 2024, choosing not to wait the 7 years such a promotion might take without purchase. The 57th Foot remained in Gibraltar between 1805 and 1809. During this time, MacGregor developed an obsession with dress, rank insignia, and medals that made him unpopular in the regiment. He forbade any enlisted man or non-commissioned officer to leave his quarters in anything less than full-dress uniform. In 1809, the 57th Foot was sent to Portugal as reinforcements for the Anglo-Portuguese army under the Duke of Wellington. During this time, he needed to be transferred to the 8th Line Battalion of the Portuguese Army, due to a disagreement with a superior officer. This intensified to the point that he needed to request discharge that was approved. MacGregor formally retired from the British service on the 24th May 1810 and returned to Britain. The 57th Foot's actions at the Battle of Albuera on the 16th May 1811 would earn it considerable prestige and the nickname the Die Hards. Their lieutenant was wounded by canister shot, but despite his injuries, he refused to retire from the battle, encouraging his men with the words, "Die Hard 57th, die hard." MacGregor would later associate himself with this good reputation. Despite having left the regiment 1 year prior, this was an earlier telltale sign of his deceptive nature. This had little bearing on reality, but MacGregor nevertheless created an air of credible respectability for himself in London society. In December 1811, Maria MacGregor died. At a stroke, MacGregor lost his main source of income and the support of the influential Bowter family. Getting engaged to another heiress so soon would draw public outcry from the Bowters. Returning home to the MacGregor lands in Scotland would be intolerably dull, and going back to the British Army would be awkward and difficult due to his unceremonious departure from its ranks. MacGregor, hungry for power and status, turned his sights to the colonial revolts against Spanish rule in Latin America, particularly Venezuela, where 7 of the 10 provinces had declared themselves an independent republic in July 1811, starting the Venezuelan War of Independence. Thus, he saw an opportunity for gain. He noticed how a Venezuelan revolutionary general had been treated in London as a celebrity. Desiring the same for himself, he saw adventure in the New World as a way to obtain similar prestige in Britain on his homecoming, and so he sold the small Scottish estate he had inherited from his father and grandfather and sailed for South America in early 1812. On the way, he stopped in Jamaica, where he was tempted to settle among the planters and traders, but having no introductory letters to that place, he was not received into society. After a comfortable sojourn in Kingston, he sailed for Venezuela and disembarked there in April 1812. MacGregor arrived in the Venezuelan capital Caracas a fortnight after much of the city had been destroyed by an earthquake. With swathes of the country under the control of advancing royalist armies, the revolutionary government was losing support and starting to fracture. He continued to misrepresent his status, tricking the Venezuelan revolutionaries into thinking he was one of the famous Die Hards. He was given command of a cavalry battalion with rank of colonel and went to fight on their behalf. MacGregor married the daughter of a prominent Caracas family and a cousin of the revolutionary Simon Bolivar in Maracay on the 10th of June 1812. Although the revolutionary cause collapsed not long after, having retreated to New Granada, MacGregor entered that republic's military service as a commander. It was said that by the introduction of the European system of tactics, He considerably improved the discipline of the troops, but some under his command disliked him. An official expressed contempt for him in a letter. "I am sick and tired of this bluffer or Quixote or the devil knows what. This man can hardly serve us in New Granada without heaping 10,000 embarrassments upon us." The revolutionary saga continued as the Republicans retook Caracas in August 1813, although this was short-lived as the Spanish royalists had crushed the Second Republic by mid-1814. MacGregor retreated to Cartagena, which was held by the revolutionaries, where he fought in vain for the defense of the city against the Spanish. Ultimately, he was able to escape on gunboats passing through the Spanish fleet, successfully avoiding the frigates. Leaving the city to be captured, he escaped to Jamaica, and the British merchant class that had shunned him on his first arrival in 1812 now welcomed him as a hero. The Scotsman entertained many dinner parties with exaggerated accounts of his part in the Cartagena siege, leading some to believe that he had personally headed the city's defense. One Englishman toasted the Hannibal of modern Carthage. After this, MacGregor rejoined Bolivar's revolutionary efforts in Santo Domingo on the Caribbean island of Hispaniola. He was received back into Bolivar's new army as a brigadier general. Landing back on the continent, they retook the port town of Carapano and drove the Spanish from many central Venezuelan towns. Not long afterwards, Bolivar's main army was broken at the hands of a numerically superior Spanish force, which pushed MacGregor into a massive eastward retreat across hundreds of miles. Two pursuing royalist armies chased MacGregor constantly as he retreated across country, but failed to break his rearguard. With no carts and only a handful of horses, the Scotsman was forced to leave his wounded where they fell. MacGregor's way east was obstructed by a royalist force, but he led his men in a furious charge that prompted a Spanish retreat. When the Spanish finally caught up to him, the Scotsman deployed his 1,200 men, mostly native archers, behind a marsh and a stream. The Spanish cavalry were bogged down in the marsh, while the archers repelled the infantry with volleys of arrows. After 3 hours, MacGregor charged and routed the Spanish. In many a historian's view, this marked the zenith of MacGregor's celebrity in South America. He had, according to his biographer, led his troops with brilliant success. Another historian agrees, calling the march a remarkable feat, demonstrating genuine military skill. He later received an acclamatory letter from Bolivar. "The retreat which you had the honor to conduct is, in my opinion, superior to the conquest of an empire. Please accept my congratulations for the prodigious services you have rendered my country." MacGregor's march would remain prominent in the South American revolutionary narrative for years. The retreat also earned him the title of Xenophon of the Americas. MacGregor's next move was to annex Amelia Island just off mainland Florida, which he captured from the Spanish without a shot being fired. He funded the expedition by raising $160,000 through the sale of scrips to investors, promising them fertile acres in Florida or their money back with interest, but they did not receive repayment after the island was later recaptured, although MacGregor did arrange to have commemorative medallions with the Latin inscriptions. "Amelia I came, I saw, I conquered," and "Liberty for the Floridas under the leadership of MacGregor." In 1817, President James Monroe described the Amelia Island affair as a mere private, unauthorized adventure. MacGregor funded his next deceitful expedition to Portobello, this time taking British troops to the Americas, by once again making unfulfillable promises of lucrative payment. MacGregor sailed for South America in November 1818 aboard a former Royal Navy brigantine, which was named the Hero. The men came close to mutiny when MacGregor failed to produce the $80 silver per man on arrival promised by his recruiters. When his men managed to march into Portobello without challenge, MacGregor issued a flowery proclamation. "Soldiers, our first conquest has been glorious. It has opened the road to future and additional fame." MacGregor was urged to march on Panama City to take advantage of his good momentum. But he wasn't interested. He devoted most of his attention to forming a new chivalric order of his design, the emblem of which would be a green cross. The lack of patrolling by MacGregor's troops allowed the Spanish to march straight into Portobello early on the 30th of April 1819. MacGregor was still in bed when the Spaniards found his riflemen drilling in the main square and opened fire. Awoken by the noise, MacGregor threw his bed and blankets from the window onto the beach below and jumped out after them. then attempted to paddle out to his ships on a log. He passed out and would probably have drowned had he not been picked up and brought aboard the Hero by one of his naval officers. MacGregor astonishingly abandoned his men at Portobello. The remnants of MacGregor's abandoned army had no choice but to surrender. Most of the surviving officers and troops entered miserable existences in captivity. If you thought MacGregor's worrying desires for undue status, prestige, and his delusions of grandeur ended there, well, you're wrong. After the treacherous events of Portobello in April of 1819, MacGregor was now in Haiti, and his lofty proclamations and sheer deceit only worsened. He seized the Hero from her owner, renaming the ship the self-absorbed name El MacGregor, and fraudulently told the Haitian authorities that drunkenness, insanity, and mutiny by his captain had forced him to take the ship. He soon after sold the vessel, pocketing the proceeds. Waiting for him in Haiti were 500 officers and enlisted men. Courtesy of recruiters in Ireland and London, a further 400 men and several ships with supplies arrived from Britain in the summer of 1819, bolstering MacGregor's numbers. MacGregor bombastically announced his intention to liberate New Granada, but then hesitated. The lack of action, rations, or pay for weeks prompted most of the British volunteers to go home. His 900 men had dwindled to a meager 250. His remaining officers included Lieutenant Colonel Michael Rafter, who had bought a commission with the hope of rescuing his brother William, who, unbeknownst to him, had been left by MacGregor to die at Portobello. After being driven away from Rio de la Hacha harbor by cannon on the 4th of October, MacGregor ordered a night landing west of the town and said that he would take personal command once the troops were ashore. MacGregor watched from a safe distance as his men landed on the beach and waited for 2 hours for him to join them, but he failed to appear. Attacked by a larger Spanish force, they countered and managed to capture the town. MacGregor still refused to come ashore, convinced that the flag flying over the fort must be a trick. Even when one of his officers rowed out to tell him to come into port, MacGregor would not step ashore for over a day. When he did appear ashore, many of his soldiers swore and spat at him. But this didn't stop MacGregor from issuing yet another lofty proclamation, identifying himself as His Majesty the Inca of New Granada. From there it quickly became apparent that MacGregor was not capable of organizing his men. It was the case that he abstained from command in all but name. A number of his men, seeing his true colors, decided to leave on a captured Spanish schooner. MacGregor convened his remaining officers the next day and, giving them promotions and Green Cross decorations, exhorted them to help him lead the defense. Once again, MacGregor escaped aboard a ship just as the Spanish attacked, leaving his men ashore to die. MacGregor returned to Haiti to find that news of his latest debacle had reached there before he could take control of the narrative. His wife Josepha and their son had been evicted in Jamaica, where he was wanted for piracy, so was unable to join them there. He similarly could not go back to Bolivar, who was so outraged by MacGregor's recent conduct that he accused the Scotsman of treason and ordered his death by hanging if he ever set foot on the South American mainland again. MacGregor's whereabouts for the half year following October 1819 are unknown. Back in London in June 1820, Michael Rafter published his highly censorious account of MacGregor's adventures, Memoirs of Gregor MacGregor, dedicating the book to his brother Colonel William Rafter and the troops abandoned at Portobello and Rio de la Hacha. MacGregor's next known location is at the court of King George Frederick Augustus of the Mosquito Coast at Cape Gracias Adayos on the Gulf of Honduras in April 1820. The Mosquito people, descendants of shipwrecked African slaves and indigenous people, shared the historic British antipathy towards Spain, and the British authorities in the region had crowned their most powerful chieftains as kings since the 17th century. These were kings in little more than name, with no effective control over the country they ostensibly led. Britain crowned and protected them simply so they could declare the area to be under Mosquito sovereignty and thereby obstruct Spanish claims. There had been a modest British settlement on the coast around the Black River, but this had been evacuated following the Anglo-Spanish Convention of 1786. By the 1820s, the most visible sign of prior colonization was a small graveyard overgrown by the jungle. On 29 April 1820, George Frederick Augustus signed a document granting MacGregor and his heirs a substantial swathe of Mosquito territory, 8 million acres or 12,500 square miles or 32,375 square kilometers, an area larger than Wales in exchange for rum and jewelry. But remember, this land was practically worthless and actually controlled by the British in all but name. The land was pleasing to the eye but unfit for cultivation and could sustain little in the way of livestock. What followed was MacGregor's invention of the land of Poyais, capitalizing on the aftermath of the Battle of Waterloo, which had created a bullish stock market frenzy in Britain, combined with the Latin American revolutions creating new lucrative opportunities for investors. MacGregor mounted an aggressive sales campaign. He gave interviews in the national newspapers, engaged publicists to write advertisements and leaflets, and had Poyais-related ballads composed and sung on the streets of London, Edinburgh and Glasgow. His proclamation to the Poyais was distributed in handbill form. In mid-1822 there appeared in Edinburgh and London a 355-page guidebook chiefly intended for the use of settlers, sketch of the Mosquito Shore, including the territory of Poyais, ostensibly the work of a Captain Thomas Strangeways, aide-de-camp to the cazique, but actually written either by MacGregor himself or by accomplices. In this climate of a constantly shifting Latin America where governments rose, fell, and adopted new names from year to year, it did not seem so implausible that this country might exist, or that a decorated general like MacGregor might be its leader. MacGregor's invented title as the cazique became a great adornment for the dinner tables and ballrooms of sophisticated London. Rumours abounded that he was partially descended from indigenous royalty. His exotic appeal was enhanced by the arrival of the striking Princess Josepha. The MacGregors received countless social invitations, including an official reception at Guildhall from the Lord Mayor of London. MacGregor devised a tricameral parliament and other convoluted and convincing constitutional arrangements for Poyais, drew up commercial and banking mechanisms, and designed distinctive uniforms for each regiment of the Poyaisian army. His imaginary country had an honours system, landed titles, a detailed coat of arms, and the same green cross flag he had used in Florida. By the end of 1821, MacGregor's convincing fantasy earned him the borrowing of an attractive estate at Oakhall Wanstead to be a British base for the supposed Poyaisian royal family. MacGregor rewarded his followers with the Order of the Green Cross and conferred other invented titles as a tool of flattery. He had offices set up in London, Edinburgh and Glasgow to sell impressive-looking land certificates to the general public and to administrate the onboarding of prospective emigrants. MacGregor's publicists informed the public that Poyais soil was so fertile that a farmer could have 3 maize harvests a year, or grow cash crops such as sugar or tobacco without hardship. Detailed projections forecast profits of millions of dollars. Fish and game were so plentiful that a man could hunt or fish for a single day and bring back enough to feed his family for a week. The natives were not just cooperative but intensely pro-British. The capital was St. Joseph, a flourishing seaside town of wide paved boulevards, colonnaded buildings and mansions, inhabited by as many as 20,000. St. Joseph had a theatre, an opera house and a domed cathedral. There was also a bank, the Poyaisian Houses of Parliament, and a royal palace. According to MacGregor, about 500 had bought Poyaisian land by early 1823, many investing their life savings. MacGregor became, to quote one 21st century financial analyst, the founding father of securities fraud. It is suggested that the success of MacGregor's scheme was only made possible thanks to the speculative mania which had been fueled by Bank of England credit expansion starting in 1822. This credit expansion caused a boom of investment in risky ventures and higher order industries. Given the declining lending standards and borrowing costs which accompany any period of credit expansion, British investors jumped at the chance to invest extensively in the newly independent states of Latin America, creating a speculative mania surrounding the investments of that continent, which played perfectly into the hands of MacGregor and his attempts to raise money for his non-existent kingdom. This leads into the events detailed in the first video of this 2-part series. In total, 4 ships set sail for the Americas, only to reach disappointment and destitution. Of the roughly 250 who had sailed on Honduras Packet and Kennersley Castle, at least 180 had perished. Fewer than 50 ever returned to Britain. MacGregor, knowing that his scheme was soon to be found out, fled to France. In an attempt to cover his tracks, he claimed that he himself had been defrauded, alleged embezzlement by some of his agents, and claimed that covetous merchants in British Honduras were deliberately undermining Poyais. MacGregor's representative consoled the survivors, but vigorously denied claims that the territory did not exist issuing libel cases against some of the British newspapers on MacGregor's behalf. Now in France, MacGregor attempted to relaunch his devious scheme there. At the same time, he also sought to persuade the Spanish to fund an expedition that he would lead to retake Guatemala on their behalf. The Spanish did not buy into it. In December 1824, in a letter to the King of Spain, MacGregor astonishingly claimed to be himself descendant of the ancient kings of Scotland, seen by some as the very height of his hubris. The French scheme failed to depart after French government officials became suspicious after receiving applications for passports to a country they had never heard of, ordering the ship to be kept in port. MacGregor went into hiding in the French provinces. He was arrested after 3 months and sent to prison on 7th December 1825, attempting to reassociate himself with the Republican movement in Latin America. MacGregor issued a declaration from his prison cell on the 10th of January 1826, claiming that he was contrary to human rights, held prisoner for reasons of which he is not aware, and suffering as one of the founders of independence in the New World. This attempt to convince the French that he might have some kind of diplomatic immunity did not work. On 6 April 1826, MacGregor was first made to stand trial in France for the alleged complex conspiracy to profit personally from a fraudulent land concession and loan prospectus. After a retrial, he was finally found not guilty and acquitted, thanks in part to MacGregor's highly effective lawyer and a largely fictional 5,000-word statement persuading the judge that there was insufficient evidence to prove his case against him. MacGregor returned to Britain, where he attempted on a number of occasions to sell more land certificates, with the full truth of his hoax never being fully realized by the public, but his confidence trick had run its course by this point. Other charlatans set up their own similar scams, competing with MacGregor and limiting his already dwindling influence. By 1834, he was back living in Scotland. An attempt to sell some land certificates in 1837 marks the last record of his scheming. Josepha MacGregor died in 1838, and MacGregor almost immediately left for Venezuela. He resettled in Caracas, applying for citizenship and restoration to his former rank in the Venezuelan army with back pay and a pension. MacGregor presented a sob story. He stressed his travails on Venezuela's behalf 2 decades earlier and asserted that Bolivar, who had died in 1830, had effectively deported him. He described several unsuccessful requests to return and being forced to remain outside the Republic by causes and obstacles out of his control while losing his wife, 2 children, and the best years of his life and all his fortune. Several of MacGregor's former revolutionary comrades supported him, saying he had enlisted in our ranks from the very start of the War of Independence and ran the same risks as all the patriots of that disastrous time. Meriting promotions and respect because of his excellent personal conduct, MacGregor was duly confirmed as a Venezuelan citizen and divisional general in the army, with a pension of 1/3 of his salary. He settled in the capital and became a respected member of the local community. After his death at home in Caracas on 4th December 1845, he was buried with full military honors in Caracas Cathedral, with President Carlos Sablet, cabinet ministers and military chiefs marching behind his coffin. His life's misdoings went wholly unmentioned. MacGregor had effectively gotten away with it and retired a respected man in Latin America. The part of today's Honduras that was supposedly called Poyais remains undeveloped in the 21st century. Back in Scotland, at the MacGregor graveyard near Loch Katrine, the clan memorial stones make no mention of Gregor MacGregor or the country he invented.